Hello, bridge burners, bone hunters, ascendants, and elder gods. Welcome to another Malazan video where today we're going to be talking about 3 unanswered questions regarding High King Kallor. Or maybe it's Kallor. And I'm probably going to say both of those things interchangeably. And I'm probably going to get just about every pronunciation wrong. So feel free to make fun of me. I just had that video about the correct pronunciation of Malazan, and now here I go butchering just about everything else. So, just be ruthless, tear into me. I deserve it. That's karma. That's okay. So Kallor, as we know, is the self-styled High King of what he claims to be multiple empires over Malazan's history. It's tough to say if that's true or not. History in Malazan is a pretty malleable idea based on whose perspective we're reading from. So it's very difficult to say how many empires Kallor has ruled over. He brags about ruling over multiple empires, each of which are big enough to make the Malazan Empire seem like nothing more than a glorified province. And is that true? Maybe. It's tough to really say. But what we can say is that he definitely ruled over at least one empire on the continent of Jessuruku. Again, there's that pronunciation, who knows. This Kallorian empire is the one that we know about from the prologue of Memories of Ice, where basically Kallor was a giant tyrant, and in response, a group of sorcerers came together known as the Circle, and they summoned a very powerful being from another realm in an effort to dethrone Kallor. That being, of course, is the crippled god, and its descent to the Malazan world was an apocalypse-level event that pretty much destroyed the entire continent of Jessuruku and the neighboring continent of Korel, and was overall widely regarded as a bad decision. So it didn't succeed in killing Kallor, and afterwards 3 elder gods, Cruel, Draconis, and the Sister of Cold Nights, came together to pretty much finish what the Circle had started and get Kallor off of that throne. The problem there is that Kallor, being the spiteful prick that he is, wasn't going to let 3 elder gods dethrone him, and instead decided if he was going to go out, he was going to go out with style, and he ended up slaughtering his entire empire, something like 8 to 12 million citizens, as well as destroying most of the landmass of Jessuruku that wasn't already destroyed by the crippled god's fall. And this is where we get into some interesting unknown question territory, because our first question is, how did Kallor accomplish this? How did he wipe out an entire continent's worth of people? And how did he destroy a continent that was sort of already destroyed by the crippled god's fall? We've never gotten a direct answer to this, but there are 3 very popular theories among the fan base, so let's go over those. So the first theory is that Kallor used Kachin-Chamal technology to accomplish this, and specifically a skykeep. During Memories of Ice, Kallor insinuates to Onamander Rake that Rake is not utilizing Moonspawn to its full potential, and that Kallor sort of knows what that potential is because during the days of his empire, he had done a lot of research into their technology and figured out some cool secrets about how to use those keeps in a terrifyingly devastating way. We also see at the end of Dust of Dreams, the Skykeep sort of get unleashed on each other during that battle between the Kachin-Chamal and the Kachin-Naruk, and the destruction that is described is very similar to the descriptions of the destruction of Jessuruku that we see in the prologue of Memories of Ice. So there's one theory. Perhaps Kallor used Skykeep technology to just raise his entire continent and slaughter millions of people. Another theory is that Kallor used much more conventional means, namely the use of his military and perhaps starving his people out through famine to simply systematically decimate his empire. So this would be along the lines of something we might see in the real world of a despotic emperor sending his military out to slaughter citizen by citizen, or cutting off food supply to just starve everybody out. And finally, a third theory is that the Circle summoning of the crippled god really did most of the work, and that Kallor was sort of taking credit for it in an indirect way. Basically saying that as the tyrannical emperor who caused the Circle to come together and summon the crippled god in the first place, he is inadvertently to blame. This would make sense if we consider that the crippled god's fall was already supposed to be an apocalyptic event and basically have destroyed the continent in the first place. So what really was left to destroy for Kallor if the crippled god had already done the work? This is also interesting because it mirrors something that we see later in a flashback from the crippled god, where Kallor once again takes blame in an indirect way for the death of his wife, which we will touch on in just a second. So some interesting theories there. I'm partial to the Skykeep theory. I think that's the coolest. I think that would make sense in a lot of ways. But comment below. Tell me what you guys think. Tell me how Kallor accomplished this insane act of destruction. Our next big unanswered question, is Kallor the High King that's mentioned in the Kharkanas trilogy? We've only ever had one character referred to as a High King in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and then we get this mention of a High King in the Kharkanas trilogy, and of course, you've got to wonder if it is Kallor. Now, lots about the Kharkanas trilogy is currently unknown, and it's sort of thrown our understanding of the Big Ten books into chaos. Issues of timeline, family trees, locations of warrens, this stuff has all been thrown into question because of the events of the Kharkanas trilogy. And this is one of those things, this idea of Kallor being the High King in the Kharkanas trilogy definitely does not line up with the timeline as we understand it from the Big Ten, but that's not to say that he's not that High King. There could be different explanations for what's going on here. It's possible that the Kharkanas trilogy is simply what we could think of as a parallel canon to the Big Ten, and that we're supposed to really just not worry about timeline. It's possible that the metafictional narrator of the Kharkanas trilogy is an unreliable narrator, as we know Erikson loves to do, and he simply doesn't have all the details and fills things in as he needs to tell his story. And it's possible that all this stuff is going to be rectified in the forthcoming third book of the trilogy, Walk in Shadow. So there is still that chance as well. We don't get a ton of detail on the High King in the Kharkanas trilogy, but we do have a mention from Erastus that the High King is a perfect liege, in his words, and beloved by his people. That certainly does not fit the description of the Kallor we know from the Big Ten. So in that way, we could perhaps think, no, it's not Kallor. But who knows? It absolutely could still be. And finally, a third big unanswered question about Kallor is his wife, Sarah Istion, the same Sarah that we see in the Kharkanas trilogy. In The Crippled God, the 10th book of the Big Ten, we get a flashback from the point of view of April Forge, who, if you remember, is second in command to Khadgar Fant, who is leading the Taist-Leosin at that point. In this flashback, we are in the throne room of Seranus, which is the Taist-Leosin capital. Khadgar Fant is not the king during this flashback. Instead, his father is king. And April sees Kallor enter the throne room. Kallor informs the king that the king's grandmother, Sarah Istion, who is Kallor's wife, has committed suicide. Kallor takes responsibility for her death, and again, this sort of harkens right back to that theory about Kallor taking responsibility for the Crippled God's destruction of his empire. Maybe a parallel there. But he basically insinuates that blaming suicide on the victim is sort of a load of bullshit, and that no victim of suicide is really to blame, and instead it's the people around the victim and it's the environment around the victim that has led this person to do such a horrible, heinous act to themselves. And to kind of blame the victim in this case is nothing more than an excuse to absolve your own conscience. So in that same way, Kallor blames the Leosin, saying that his wife never felt like she belonged there and that she always felt like a prisoner there. But he says he's not there to claim vengeance. He says his own guilt is clear and that he couldn't ever love her enough. And instead, he's there to bring an unfinished rag doll that his wife had been making for her daughter, which in the context here certainly sounds like it's not Kallor's daughter. Kallor then disarms himself and says he's ready for the Leosin's vengeance, but the king simply tells him to go. And April Forge remembers that Kallor had the look of a man who wanted to die, but the Leosin would not grant him that death. Okay, meanwhile, in the Kharkanas trilogy, we do meet a Serap, who is part of Urisander's legion, and is a second cousin to Hun Rall. She's working to put Vatha Urisander on the throne of Kharkanas, and spoilers for Fall of Light, if you haven't read it, stop now. She is beheaded by Seranus. So now we've got two characters named Serap who are both dead for different reasons. We've got a Serap who got beheaded, and we've got a Serap who killed herself. That right there would tell you, okay, this is not the same Serap, and yet, is the name just a coincidence? So is it possible in Walk of Shadow we will see some sort of resurrection for Serap, that Hun Rall might find a way to bring her back to life, and that she could eventually go on to be the High King's wife that we've seen in this Crippled God flashback? It's all very confusing right now. pretty much everything that has to do with the Kharkanas trilogy in relation to the Big Ten is very confusing right now. So of course this means that there are plenty of us who are anxiously awaiting Walk in Shadow to see if it helps to rectify some of these inconsistencies or perhaps just new revelations about the events that we thought we knew in the Big Ten. Okay guys, there's your 3 big mysteries of High King Kallor. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you soon for another Malazan video.